They are pretty onerous. I didn't read them until like last night, and then I was like, I don't know.
Maybe just blow the lid on like the whole podcast.
Is that a liquid or just a bottle of pills?
It's a liquid.
Oh my God! I don't think
you're selling it.
It's working.
I don't think you're selling it, Chris.
You're not saying anything. Are you okay?
My mind feels magic all of a sudden.
I don't know. Something like that. I don't know.
Is that new product in your hair?
Asking good questions.
No, Phil. It's mind meld.
Yeah. It's mind meld. Don't you mean magic mind? Yes, that's what I meant.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking. Oh.
By the way, the instructions on how to use it.
Health benefits. That's why I show up on the podcast, is for the alleged health benefits. Other days I drink kombucha, but on Fridays I come here and hang out with you guys. It's fermented. That's why I'm here.
That's awesome.
I thought you were here because it's something to do with pickling or something like that, right?
That's what I said. We're fermented.
Yeah. Has a pleasant aftertaste. The aftertaste is not bad, I will admit, but like going down, it was. Oof.
That's what she said.
Okay. Someone had to go there.
I just love Lockhart. It's like, oh my God. Yeah, indeed.
I just got an email. I'm sorry, they won't sponsor us anymore after that.
That's the mind mode. That's the mind mode talking.
Magic mind. Magic mind.
Sorry. Magic mind. It's not great for your memory, but your sense of creativity is boom through the roof.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I am Chris Lockhart, and I am joined today by the full cast of characters. We have Phil Yanov, we have Oliver Cronk, and we have Wendy Keene, fresh from her, cyclone-like exploration of the world and book tour and all the wonderful things that Wendy's been doing. One of the things that consultants are always on the hook to do, obviously, is to deliver value. And I think there's always a pressure to always appear as an expert when delivering services to our clients. But one of the most critical things I think that skill sets that a consultant should have is really asking good questions of our clients and prompting our clients to think about the problems that they have that we are trying to help them with. So we wanted to talk today about asking good questions. And I think this is something, that maybe doesn't, I think superficially comes natural to a lot of consultants, but, I don't know that everyone is as good at it as maybe we should or could be. So Phil, I know, you do a lot with, Socratic method and thinking about like ways of getting to the nut of a problem. What's your take on questions, especially through the consulting lens, and how we really get our clients to think about the problems at hand?
Yeah, I love this topic, Chris, and I think it's because I think we got into this business because we felt like we had value to add because we're smart. Maybe we had some domain expertise and things like that. And it can be, there's always this temptation to just spit that out, vomit out our ideas and things early on in a process. And we don't even really know what the problem is yet. And I think that we can figure out what the problem is that we are there to solve by asking questions. And in fact, we might have to ask so many questions that like the first time we only get kind of the surface, and then we break down to like, well, what does that really mean? And why does that matter? And by the way, you might have to ask a bunch of questions, but I think the real skill set in what we do is coming up with great questions. And you've already mentioned, I think, the Socratic method, but in that, I mean, this technique of saying, I'm not sure I know, let's ask questions to figure it out, both of us together in dialogue to get to the truth is what we're mostly trying to do. I just think is a fantastic way of thinking, and it has endured in lots of places, right? So the Socratic method is part of logotherapy. The Socratic method is part of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a therapeutic thing, not just a way to get to the truth. So I love this topic. It's a thing I think about all the time. You are muted, Chris.
Oliver, Wendy, I'm kind of curious because, I think, a lot of clients, if you're asking questions, a lot of clients might say, I'm paying you to figure this out. Why don't you know this? Why are you asking me? What are your thoughts on that? Either one of you. I don't know.
I'll shoot. So I think it depends on what the questions are, right? I mean, if they are questions that someone who's a competent consultant shouldn't really be asking, then sure, that's going to create some questioning, I think, in the client's mind about whether you're the right person for the job. But if you're asking intelligent, insightful, probing questions that add a flavor for the context of the situation, I mean, some classic examples of this one in my technology world, and I'll obviously always talk about tech consulting, given that's the world I live in, is overly fixating on the technology solution and not asking those contextual questions about, but why are you guys doing this? Why is this important to you? Or, what problems is this causing you? The fact that this thing is broken that you've asked us to come in and fix. It's kind of like, because sometimes there are more creative ways of solving the client's problem if you understand that context. And those questions, I think, are really, really important for particularly technology consulting, and I'm sure consulting of various flavors as well. So I guess in summary, it's what question. And are you kind of, bringing the classic consultant skill set of trying to really understand what the problem is that you're solving? Because often you'll be brought in to solve one thing, and the reality is you need to do a root cause analysis and actually find out what the real problem is that you should really come and help the client, because that's how you add the value.
Love it. And as you all have said, and just assuming we are asking the smart questions, right? That is what we bring to the table. But I also feel like there's this shift here. Through questioning and collaborating and thinking through things together with clients, I think it leads to learning. And I think it leads to deeper relationships as well, particularly in a world that is more complex, right, than it's ever been. And we kind of have this tension because as consultants, right, people bring us in for expertise. But I just think there's a shift in the way that we can show up to really co-create and collaborate and help others think through on their own.
What are the kinds of questions? Like, what are the, I don't know, are there frameworks for the consultants love frameworks? Do we have frameworks, types of questions? Because I mean, I think about, we've got hypothesis driven analysis, right? Drilled into us as management consultants at the very least, right? And maybe that's one framework, but, just speaking from historical experience, a lot of our hypotheses tend to be true at the end of the day, right? Magically, right? And, are there other ways? What are some of the other ways, guys, to really get at the root of, I love the question of asking why. Why are you doing this?
I mean, extending on that, there's the 5 whys. Have you heard the 5 whys? So for those that haven't, it's, I guess, asking why 5 times, funny enough. Or actually, in reality, asking why until you actually get to the real why, because often it can be the superficial solutioning answer rather than, or something like, we've always done it this way, but why? And then why? And then why? So that's certainly one I've seen people use successfully.
Doesn't that ultimately end up in an answer of, well, we want to make money at the end of it?
If you ask Chris, it does.
That's on what you're solving. Yeah.
We call him coin operated Chris. Yeah. So I think that's a
Bitcoin operated.
Well,
Patreon operated, Chris.
Patreon operated, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's to Oliver's point there, the idea of digging through, right? And if it's why, is that the question you want to ask? Just digging through the layers, I think, is important. So, you started by asking the question from Oliver and Wendy, well, what if it's just a dumb question? And you're right, you don't get away with dumb questions. I don't think. But you can ask some broad questions to set the scene in a way. And if you ask that thoughtfully and you use it to dig into things that are in fact important, it'll work for you every time. You can get away with what sounds like a dumb question if you're using it to set where we're headed. And so I think that, you've got to think about what the path is there. So that's why I like, Chris, the whole idea of hypothesis-driven analysis, right, is that, well, listen, we're not here to fix the world. We're here to fix something. Let's figure out what that something is first. What are the constraints going to be around how we're talking, right? And then we can test the constraints, but let's focus in this area. Let's make sure we have, and if it is in fact a dialogue or trialogue or whatever you've got going. But in that space, however you've got, do we have people who understand the problem and how we're trying to solve it? We want subject matter experts to be part of this conversation.
Is that, it sometimes seems to me that, like, in order to ask the really good question, you kind of have to have an idea of what the answer is before you ask the question. Is that true or not? Or is that a stupid question? Does that fall in the dumb question category? Can I
be open to the idea that I'm wrong? I'm just kind of curious about that, right? I mean, so I think I might have an idea, but I think I can start with maybe I'm wrong.
A hypothesis that you're looking to test, maybe, like, kind of, yeah. I mean, as you all know, I run my own podcast, Architect Tomorrow, and the thing I love about it is it's like learning in public, and it's kind of just being curious and getting some people on the episode that I think know a lot more about something than I do, and then just testing my hypothesis and kind of questioning them, right? So,
by the way, that's every episode of this podcast for me, just so we're aware.
So I feel like, yeah, if you understand enough, I think there's an art to knowing enough about the subject matter to ask the right question, but to be open-minded enough that you don't think you already know all the answers, to be open to, different points of view. And I guess the other direction I'd potentially like to take this is it's not just about asking clients the right questions. For me, and as a consultant, you need to also ask your team the right questions, right? In terms of, okay, so what are you looking to get out of this gig? And there's there's whole career coaching type conversational questions. And then these days, of course, and we can't do an episode these days without mentioning this technological wave that's doing the round. You need to know what questions to ask the AI as well to help you be better at your job as a consultant.
Sorry, when you said technological wave, I thought you were going to mention Domino or something.
Lotus Notes.
Nice. Finally, we got it. We got Lotus Notes and Domino into the conversation. That's excellent.
Yeah. I'm actually so I completely agree. Asking your team, like, when you're in the room and you just came out of some session with the client. Now you're sitting there and you're whiteboarding a bunch of stuff on the whiteboard. And you're like, I would always ask, like, okay, great. We just regurgitated what we heard, but, like, guys, like, what does it mean? Right. And what does that mean to you? What do you think it means? Like,
or what is the client not telling us in that?
What is the client not telling us? What's missing from this picture? And I remember, I think it was at Booz, but, one of the things that was always, drilled in was, like, instead of the 5 whys, it was asking, like, well, so what, right? So what? This load balancer doesn't fail over, blah, 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 whatever. So what? What does that mean, right? Why does that matter? And I do think getting down to that is important, but I think it also it appears to me that people that ask those questions, their instinct is telling them something, right? Which is there's more there to dig into. So I don't know, like, is this just a skill you can learn, asking good questions? Or is there something, like, do you have to have it in your gut, right? Kind of thing. I don't know.
That natural curiosity helps for sure. But I'd say I'm someone that came from end user world and then got into consulting. And I think it's something that you can definitely learn. You can definitely, but yeah, I guess I've always been a pretty curious person, but even still, I've seen people that aren't like that, but they've been able to learn the sort of ability to ask the right questions in the right scenario. Yeah.
Wendy, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I would agree, Oliver. I think it can be learned. I also think this is an area where you can, sort of learn and watch others, and you can learn just by practicing. Yeah, force yourself to ask questions, even if they're not so good. Like you just get better at doing it. But Oliver and others, I think you mentioned a very important point. It's not just how we ask the questions; it's the mindset, what we're thinking as we ask those questions. A natural curiosity just to learn more or to truly solve this problem or to come up with the solution, whatever it is, and an openness that my hypothesis may be wrong. And, sort of a care, whether it's for the team or the client. I just think that how we show up is really important too.
But like Wendy, when you go in and you're doing like a business architecture engagement of some sort, and you have those first couple of meetings, don't you, with your experience and your knowledge, aren't you able to sort of, what was that movie with Russell Crowe where he had like the figures going through his mind, kind of whatever, that Beautiful Mind, right? Aren't you able to look at a magic mind, you might say? Aren't you able to look at those problems, and you're sussing, you see the problem. You may not know all the answers to the problem, but you instinctually understand. And so you are asking probing questions and you're testing hypotheses sort of in real time when you're asking those questions, right? It's like, I think you're looking at something, you think this looks like a stovepiped operation to me, right? And so you begin to ask questions. Well, how good is cross-team communication? What happens when this business unit has to talk to this? How does that work? And you're going in, but you came at it with kind of a hypothesis, I guess is the right word. Is that how you do it?
Yeah, I actually love that. I think that's really relevant. And with your great question.
Insightful question.
Really, you bring up three things to mind. One is that I think assessments, right? And we use a lot of assessments in consulting. Those can be very useful. Those are sets of questions. That's a way for us and the client to sort of self-reflect, have a common baseline. I think that's useful. So I do a lot of that. But another thing that comes to mind is because of all the experience I have and all that I've seen, I am, okay, if they have that, they probably have this. And then it's like, because of the experience, I can put things together and connect dots that someone who's not experienced can do. And then, wow, how did she ever know to ask us that? And like, well, that's eerie. But on the other hand, and this is the last point that you really bring up, that is also, I'll say, a bias, or I need to challenge that and make sure I always have an open mind, that I'm not, okay, I know how this always goes. It looks like this. And I got to make sure I don't make the wrong assumptions, and that I stay open until I truly understand and prove it too.
I think Wendy's touched on a really key point around overly pattern matching. And I see perhaps senior consultants do this, right? Where they assume too much. They then look like they're a huge ego because they think they already know all the answers, and they don't ask enough questions to validate their working hypothesis. So, but I have seen that, and then people get turned off because they go, well, this guy or girl isn't listening to me and my real problems here. So, you can straight away turn off the client by just not being interactive enough. It's a bit like public speaking, right? Like if you just broadcast and you don't inspire or engage or get some kind of audience engagement going, then you're not going to probably have as good a talk as if you were kind of asking the audience question. I mean, I've yet to perfect this, right? But I've heard from some people that do very good public speaking that actually the best way to do public speaking is actually to sort of fire out questions for the audience rather than statements. So get people thinking about what it is you're talking about so that they actually engage with it and think about it and relate it to their worldview rather than just being bleh at you with a whole load of slides. So I've yet to really cut on to that one. That's kind of still on my to-do list, but I know that some people who are particularly professional at public speaking and engaging people have mastered this, right? And they know the right way to frame the conversation.
Phil, you do this all the time. Is that true?
I was just thinking about, have I ever seen anybody do that in front of an audience? I think you could. I think it would feel uncomfortable for the speaker unless
for the
you
speaker.
practice this a lot. And then the audience themselves, I think, this is back to your point of weren't they expecting insights? They weren't expecting to be challenged. And, most people are kind of lean back in an audience. But I think in a lean forward audience, you could get to this. And I have certainly done this in small group settings. Hell, I just did this morning. And, I spent an hour and a half with a group just peppering them with questions. And part of the questions were, how do you ask better questions? Because they were, by the way, one of the guys in the group is a consultant in a big consulting firm. And his thing was, I'm having trouble figuring out how to ask the questions that allow me to get the data I need from these teams that I'm working with. How do I make that work? And so that was part of it. How do we get to better questions? So I think you can, and I think it's useful. It's probably not ever for everyone, but who is?
It's knowing your audience and knowing what types of questions to ask them. Because there are like long open-ended questions that you could ask, right? There's I need a yes, no on this type of question. I think, there are questions that like give you data, and then there are questions that are maybe more clarifying, like, help you understand what does this data mean, right? Those are different kinds of questions, right? Maybe at different points in the conversation. What's that?
Yeah. I love that, by the way. What does this mean? Because then you know what their eyes were looking at. You know where they were headed. Where was their attention focused to begin with? Because even that could be wrong. And it could be the actual problem is where they're looking.
But I think there's also the coaching questions and the ones that inadvertently you provide quite a bit of insight to the individual. And the way you make it connect with them even more is by posing it as a question, because then it forces them to think about what you've just said in relation to their worldview or their situation in the moment. So that's what I was trying to get at earlier. So it's more those kind of coaching conversation type questions that really inspire and get the brain matter going, more than just someone just sort of, firing some bullet points at you, which you then go, okay.
Yeah, because our natural response to someone telling me what to do is to be defensive, right? Unless I'm just a super high order cat, someone tells you, well, you got to do this. It's like, well, my first thing, of course, is to ask a question. But for many people, it's just defensive. You know what? I ask these guys, they don't answer me. And of course, you want to go, well, then why don't you do this? But the real point is, well, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? If they're not answering you, what's next? And kind of have them explore it, because that puts all the heuristic work on their head, in their brain, and it gets them to solve the problems. By the way, one of the reasons I like this too is it also teaches people, as Oliver's kind of keeps bringing up the coaching side of this, but it teaches people, I'm not here to answer your problems for you. I'm here to show you how to answer your problems for you, because that's useful. You'll go do that on your own time later.
Isn't that the difference, though, between a good consultant and one that's just trying to sell you more billable hours? Is the one that's trying to help the person work out the way forward, rather than the one that's just trying to become dependent and the crutch that helps that organization kind of operate?
I love what you said there, Oliver, but there was a lot of judgment in that, right? You just
I feel attacked.
Is like this.
I feel attacked.
I think a good consultant, by the way, helps you become better and sells a bunch of hours.
Don't get me wrong, but there should be a client going, "Wow, that was very supportive and value adding, not extractive and exploitative."
I agree with that entirely.
Yeah. I'll buy more.
We want to be good humans. Yeah.
Purposes, right? Because the way they operate is mutual benefit rather than one way.
And as we say, let's do bigger and better things together, right? Absolutely. Let's build you up so we can do that together.
See,
yeah, and I think
that's why I want to hang around Wendy. We're doing bigger and better.
That's why we all want to hang around Wendy.
Yeah.
In our sort of our pre-roll discussion, on that point, Wendy, I had mentioned one of my best relationships, I feel, looking back, with a client, where I felt like I wasn't just there doing what they told us to do, and I wasn't just there telling them a whole bunch of airy things that didn't really matter. And what I felt like was there was a real collaborative feeding off of each other, right? And the client got better. And the way that this client referred to us was as his extra brain cells, right? And I loved that, because it was like, a recognition that on our own, either one, I don't need you, the consultants here, to do this thing for me of the thing that I already know. I can do that, right? But I feel challenged and by some of the questions you're asking, and I'm going to push back on you with and it was a very collaborative type of thing. All right, so look, I know we want to ask good questions of the clients, and I know we want to like challenge them, and the story I shared about like extra brain cells, I thought that made me feel good, but there was also like a personal relationship that developed as a result of that, like a mutual trust kind of thing, right? I wonder about. And by the way, so it got to a point where like, you could have arguments over things, right? In a room at a whiteboard. And it's like, I think you're wrong about this. It's this, it's that, whatever. And there was enough of a relationship that it withstood that sort of thing. I wonder though about it, like at the beginning of a relationship, like how much can you forcefully ask questions that maybe they don't want to answer or think is not, because they're coming into this with a preconceived notion of like, here's why I hired you to do these things. Why are you asking me about this other thing? Right. It can become combative, couldn't it?
I think you're touching on like, how do you build rapport and psychological safety very rapidly in order to be able to have the right conversation? And I feel like this has become really hard in virtual settings. But for me, like, it's the corridor chat you have before you get in the meeting room that lets you build the rapport that then allows you to have because you've had the human to human kind of conversation walking into the room that then allows you to ask that punchy question that says, okay, so why are we really doing this, Mr. or Mrs. Client? But you need that foundation of trust and psychological safety to better really do that. And I think to your point earlier about the team as well, like I've seen quite toxic teams where there isn't that, and therefore you can't be honest. You can't ask the questions that really there's too many elephants in the room as a result, because you can't really go, hey, that big elephant over there about the client's big problem that we're not allowed to talk about, because there isn't psychological safety there. You can't have that elephant in the room type conversation.
Does Wendy, I mean, you're fairly senior. You're senior, and I don't mean in age. I mean like in experience, and you're the senior partner, right? In most of these scenarios, are you willing to be like questioned in a fashion by junior team members in a team room scenario? Like, is there a power dynamic that's part of this where senior partners maybe are like, listen, kid, I've done this for so long. The answer is X, right? And you've got some young whippersnapper that's like, well, why? In other words, does this method work across a wide range of power dynamic?
It's a good question. I really think it does start with what you're saying, Oliver. It's the human rapport. It's easing into questions. And I think importantly, it is framing, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to do? There's a reason why we're asking these questions. And so if someone of any age is asking, let's say, me hard questions, if it's going towards the solution, I'm going to see that. Or if it feels really edgy or just push, like we can tell the difference between like not going to the problem and, like an arrogance versus a trying to solve it. Or I might even, to a junior consultant, even redirect, so someone asked me something. So when you ask me that, are you trying to understand X, Y, and Z, or, just kind of even a little bit coach them through the process, but human dynamics and rapport and being really clear about what we're doing, what we're trying to work towards.
When I was a much younger consultant, I remember having the conversation with a partner at the time, and he was like, look, this was at like, I swear to God, like 2:30 in the morning, right? I had just sent whatever spreadsheet, and he called me up and he's like, listen, you can't talk to me like that in front of the rest of the team. Right. And it was like, okay, got it. Right. So I found where the boundary mark was, right, on that type of thing. Right. And I think you can push too hard internally. And I often wonder, especially for kids that, come out of Wharton or like, some like high powered MBA program, and they're sitting in front of a CEO or somebody who's been around for 30 years, and they're asking sort of naive type questions, but they're so self-confident. I think it can come across as like, what the hell are you doing here? You're asking a dumb question, kid, right? That kind of thing. I don't know. Phil, do you think the Socratic method is overused at all in this process? Are there situations where maybe it doesn't work as well? And if so, why?
No, I love the question because, again, I was having a conversation earlier with someone about this, and of course, his first words were to curse Socrates, but
did he say it in Greek though, or was it like?
It didn't. It's not that kind of crowd. But in the, I think here's the thing. I think the Socratic method is abused by some people, and here's how the form of the abuse takes. That is, if I'm going to ask you pointed and directed questions because I think I don't respect your point of view, and I'm trying to point you out as an idiot because I think if I ask you questions, I'm going to show you up. I think that's a misuse of this. That's not truly the Socratic method. I think the Socratic method, if used as in its purest form, as we understand it, as handed down by Plato and Xenophon, right? Because Socrates didn't write anything down. But if we look and we think about what we're seeing there, that is, I approach the topic with understanding, but humility. I assume that you are going to approach the topic with understanding and humility. And we together are going to ask questions that get us to a truth. That, I think, is hard to mess up. I mean, you might ask the questions wrong, et cetera, but if your intentions are correct, you will get to where you're going, I think, however many steps it takes. So I believe, and there are people out there who do great work on this. Ward Farnsworth's book on the Socratic method is fantastic. He's former dean of the University of Texas Law School. Fantastic thinker on this topic, right? And he kind of lays out why it works and how you would use this for yourself in a variety of situations. Fantastic stuff. I believe in it entirely. But does it get abused by people? You betcha.
I think the humility part seems like would probably be a major obstacle for a lot of people in management consulting, especially.
There's a cultural dimension to this as well, though, isn't there? I mean,
absolutely.
And whether you're being constructive or not, to Wendy's point about I can see why you're asking that question. If it's not immediately obvious, I think you need to kind of almost check your motivations for asking the question and making sure that you're empathetic to the person that's being asked, because otherwise they can feel like they're being interrogated. There's a difference between an interrogation, isn't there, and an interview session, and a questioning session, right? So, I wanted to ask you a question, Chris. How do you do this without getting yourself all greasy?
You say greasy?
I say greasy, yeah.
Am I shine? I'm shining?
No, I'm just being stupid. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
I'm asking a stupid question.
Well, no, but it's I think of my default position in asking questions is to understand for myself, right? But I don't ask the question I don't know anything about this. Tell me about X. It's I know a little bit about this. I think it's like this. Help me understand why this is that, right? For whatever, and then ultimately, my why question. I don't ask the why. I feel that's like an interrogation. Why? I like, Wendy, you will like this. And I think we've talked about this before. It's great. That's awesome that the load balancer is going to load balance between 3 Amazon cloud regions, right? That's fantastic. What business problem am I solving with that, right? Where does that fall flat? That falls flat with people who are just so in an engineering mindset, technical mindset, that it's so self-evident why that's needed. They've never asked themselves that question.
I literally had this earlier today. So I was talking to someone about that they want to turn on some security control to prevent people from, I think, using their own devices, for example, with documentation. And I said, why? Where has that requirement come from? Who has said that there is a risk here that you're mitigating? And unfortunately, because they're so in the, we must turn on all the security controls. But I'm like, do we really need to? Who is driving that? Because there's a danger that you're preventing people from actually doing work, and you'll create other risks by going off and forcing them to kind of go use workarounds. So yeah, I completely feel that one. There's some people just get so like in the, we must do this, we must turn everything on because it's best practice. And it's like, but is it the right practice, or is it just what you think is? Yeah. So asking the questions sometimes doesn't work for that reason, that people are just so stuck in their view, they've lost empathy for why they're doing what they're doing.
But I think both of you, with that very good example, you illustrate maybe a little bit of a teachable moment, right? So maybe in the moment they were irritated and annoyed, and I don't think that way, this is not my problem, but you planted a seed like, I'm supposed to think about value, or like the standard might not be the right thing. I think that's good. It's teaching people how to think, challenging.
Do you run the risk of being seen as an obstructionist? To like get it, we need to get shit done. And you're asking about, why, right? Why are you asking these questions?
So this worked out great for Socrates, right? I mean, he asked too many questions and the people of Athens put you to death. So that's the kind of thing. So I think that, you started this, and I think it's a good question. And I think, Oliver mentioned earlier, like the 5 whys, but Wendy showed us kind of as a teachable moment. Why? Asking the question, why, tends to be viewed as a challenging question, right? As a challenge question. So I have heard people say that if you want to ask why, find some way to rephrase that so that you can get past people's defensive mechanisms. So, for example, rather than why, might be, now, how did you come to think that was a good idea?
That sounds passive aggressive.
That's passive, yeah.
I mean, tell me your reasoning behind that.
I like that.
I think it's a bit like the difference between asking an open question and a closed question, isn't it? Too many people just ask the closed question, which then gets them to say no or yes. This feels like there's a similar thing here around, you ask this in the right way and the client will open up and give you the rationale and tell you why. You ask it the wrong way, and to Phil's point, people will just fold their arms and go, well, that's always the way we've done it, or management told me that that's how we were supposed to do it. You'll get a very defensive response rather than the nuanced, well, yeah, we were thinking that was a bit weird, but so it's kind of, it goes back to that psychological safety point, I think. Like, is the person
right? And so I didn't.
Question?
Yeah, I just want to lean into that point for a second, Oliver, because I think it's so important, and I think everybody here agrees. Creating that psychological safety, creating the trust. I'm not here to shut you down. I'm here to understand you better. That's the kind of question I want to ask, right? And the thing is, it's funny. I was listening again earlier today to someone kind of go through this same thing. And it was clear to me that one of the reasons they weren't getting good answers is they had no respect for the other party. And it's like, and if that is reflected in the way you ask the questions, they're going to go, heck with you. Sorry, tried to come up with a podcast safe word for that. Right, they're going to go, heck with you. You're not getting that from me, no matter how many times you ask now. And because I was like, wow, the attitude is clear in here. And I don't think that works. So that was back. In fact, I was thinking of that example when I said earlier, this Socratic method does not work if you don't approach with humility. We're to pull in another framework, because Chris points out rightly so, as consultants, we love frameworks, right? So, I am a fan of elements of the transactional analysis framework, and I want to have an adult to adult conversation. I want us to be on an equal playing field when we're having this conversation. So I'm talking to you like an adult. I'm not talking to you like a critical parent to a child, or of any sort of a parent to a child. It's like at an adult level, I just want to ask you this question, and I'm curious about what you're going to tell me, because I have no idea. Talk to me.
Do you find that always works for you personally, Phil?
No, nothing always works. But the thing is, by showing up as someone who says, just trying to figure this out, talk to me.
The other space that we might want to touch on here is interviewing, like recruiting and so on. And the questioning technique, I think in interviews, I mean, there's a few different ones, right? But the STAR method, you may have come across, the situation, task, action, response, or whatever. I probably got some of that wrong, but the way of structuring your response such that you actually give the interviewer the kind of answers you want. I wonder if there's something similar here around the sort of mindset for asking. Yeah, I don't know. Does some of this work? You could perhaps use STAR or spin or some of these other techniques like grow and so on. There's a few different questioning techniques like that, right, that you could maybe use to help some of these scenarios.
Sounds like we should trademark our own consultant saying things framework for asking good questions.
The WTF framework.
What were you thinking?
I'm desperate to work in Greasy again somehow, but I'm struggling.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. Let me just say, I think, Oliver, that is a topic for an entire episode there.
I love that topic. Yeah. On this thread, just the other thing that occurs to me is, we're all in violent agreement on these topics, but we're all kind of in the Anglosphere, right? In other words, there's a cultural thing here too, right? And look, I mean, I know Brits can be passive aggressive and, all that sort of stuff. And Americans are probably blunt. And I think Australians are probably even more blunt, right? And Canadians probably apologize too much. But, there's, sorry, Canadians. See what I did there? So, but what I'm wondering is, so Wendy, you're in Norway, so it's not really in the Anglosphere, right? It's like, do you detect any difference in how maybe Norwegians pick this up or Scandinavians, or have you any insight on the other regions of the world you've been? I mean, we've never really touched on Asia, and I think that's like a whole culturally different thing. But like, if we think of the Western world, at least, do we have any insight? What's your insight into sort of the cultural difference?
That is such a good point. I mean, for where I live, for Norway, Scandinavia, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is the relationship and the psychological safety of it. There's a different building up relationship before I would ever ask somebody like some straight shooting questions that I would as an American. It's like, all right, well, we went on a hike together, and then there was this. It's like
you carved a leg of lamb together, right? Yeah,
exactly. It's like, I really have to build relationship first. So it's like, that's one cultural difference of being, longer. I think cultures have different like protocols of, how to just kind of interact with each other, who can ask what you can ask when, how much you can press, how much is expected. Like I know I'm a little bit off topic, but to make the point, I have a very dear colleague and friend that we go through this really, and this is cultural. We go through this really weird, like, okay, we're going to go. No, please stay. No, please go. It's like we have to play this game of like them asking us to stay, but we're ready to go. But if we don't do it 3 times, it's not right. So it is.
We do that in the South too, by the way.
But no, I think the culture is really important. And as always, observe, learn before you start, getting in there and doing your thing, I think.
So it requires, and Phil, you made this point earlier, it requires you knowing something about who you're asking the question of, right? And probably, I think, so that's knowing your audience and knowing how to engage your audience and knowing whether you have the rapport with that audience to ask maybe some of these difficult questions. And as I was arguing earlier, I think you also need to know a little bit about the thing that you're asking about, at least at some level, in order to have a coherent question. Although I have seen, the stereotype of the senior partner that swings in one afternoon after you've been engaged heads down for 3 weeks on something. They fly in, they look at everything, they ask one question, and they know nothing about any of it. And that one question, they leave, and you're like, oh shit. Right. And it's like they were, everything is upended by that one question. It's like they didn't know anything about what we were doing. How did they do that? That has always been sort of a magical thing to me. But I think by and large, you need to know something about what you're questioning, right, in order to ask the good questions. Let's do some final thoughts on this, because I think we could talk about this for quite a long time. I don't know, Oliver, you want to go first? And I know, like you come at this from a technical consulting perspective mainly, right? And do you think it's different at all as sort of your final thought on this?
Yeah, my final thought on this is, as I was saying earlier, I don't think this comes naturally to technologists. We tend to be a bit black and white and engineering focused, and this is more the sort of soft, cuddly, soft skill sort of territory that isn't always in the wheelhouse of a good technical consultant. So I would say my final thought on this is, if you're not thinking about how you're asking good questions, this is probably an area of self-development for you that you should go away and have a bit of a think about. It certainly was for me. I think it's been relatively recently that I've kind of realized that it's not about me, blah. It's actually about me using my ears, listening, and asking the right questions to get the insight that I need to be as effective as possible on an engagement. And I think that's a hard lesson learned for technologists who sometimes feel like they have to just demonstrate their technical prowess, win the client over, that I am someone that they should trust technically. Actually, you do need some of that. Of course, you need to set up that relationship, but you also need to create that space that allows for you to discover and learn. And the discovery phase of projects, for example, on tech projects, is so important, but often massively underdone. So yeah, that would be my thought from a sort of tech perspective.
So that's the technologist being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that. Wendy, what are you thinking here?
That was really insightful. Just echoing some of the points we've made, how you show up in the questions is really important. Curious, continually being open, actually caring, thinking about what's the intent of what we're trying to do. The other thing, just to reiterate, this can be learned. Just start doing it, practicing it, watch other people that are good at it. And on a personal note, I profoundly appreciate questions. I feel like they are a bit of a secret to the human existence. How we pull information as students, science, the things in our life and the world and career we want to create, we get that by asking questions and finding our way and navigating through them. So fall in love with questions and yeah. Indeed.
I love that. Philip, Baron Yanoff.
Yes. I love being here and pulling all these insights together. I think this has been one of the hardest lessons for me over my professional career, was to resist the temptation to appear the expert in a room and in fact demonstrate your expertise by asking good questions as opposed to spitting out factoids that you've collected. It's just you think that's the way you become the alpha in this spot, and you're wrong. The way you become the sage in this spot is to ask questions that develop answers that might be in your head, but might be in somebody else's, but get them to think about it. So I think it's hard. It was very hard for me, but I think the payoff is spectacular. The last thing I think I would leave you in that regard is, we've been talking about these primarily in sort of a group setting. You're sitting around talking to people, ask questions. There's no good reason that you can't simply show up to some smart person and start asking questions and learn about how they think about how the world works and what the future might hold for yourself. But I think find smart people and ask good questions is a great way to live your life. That's me.
It's fantastic. Oliver has a question. You have a question, Mark.
I'm being stupid.
You're just screwing around with Zoom. Okay.
He's the Riddler.
All right. Listen, guys, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. I know everyone's super busy. So ask good questions, everybody. I think that's where this comes down to, right? Ask good questions. You can become a better consultant. Thanks, everybody. Look, we will see everyone next time. Cheers.
I mean, talking of extra brain cells, Chris, I hear you've been trying a product that maybe helps you with extra brain cells. Is that right?
That is actually true. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, there's this product called Magic Mind, right? And it is you think about consultants doing like energy shots, right? Like 5-hour energy, and they get all jittery on the taurine or whatever, or they're pounding monster drinks all day to stay awake and be alert. And historically, I've always thought like, oh, well, coffee keeps you up and keeps you alert. And then I was like, I read some science that said like, well, that type of caffeine really activates your muscles, whereas like tea and black tea caffeine is really brain activated. So I've really been trying to do a lot of tea-based things, right? And so I found this thing. It's called Magic Mind. It's like all natural. It's full of like matcha and like turmeric and a bunch of different vitamins and it feels like a vitamin B12 shot is kind of what it feels like, right? So you drink this thing, And instead of getting all jittery and, sweaty, right, and disgusting and sitting in your cubicle, just getting greasy as the day goes on, right? It is actually, kind of perks you up. And, I like the idea of it being all natural, because I don't like ingesting a whole bunch of crap that's going to be, bad for me throughout the day. But so I'm glad I actually took one before the podcast began. Here it is right here. So it's like this little shot. It's kind of like a smoothie, actually, is how it goes down. And a lot of people actually use this. I know the Kardashians have talked about it, if that floats your boat. I know that Joe Rogan talks about it. And of course, he does all sorts of like eugenic type stuff, right? And all that sort of stuff. I don't know. We'll see. It may or may not work. I don't know. I'm trying it out. I'm glad you asked about that, Oliver. Thank you.
All of those people are long-time listeners.
Yeah. I love that, sitting at your desk getting all greasy all day. Like I almost lost it.
I almost lost it. I took all my composure not to completely break it.
Oliver, that was so smooth, by the way. I was like, wow, I was really impressed, you guys.
So in our next recording, I'll offer the link, right?
Awesome.
Because I'm trialing this, and then, by next recording, I will be full of magic.
Greasy.
Yeah, more greasy.
No grease.
Get the shine off my forehead and my nose. All right. What the hell are we talking? Thank you, Oliver, for.
I helped, and then I completely torpedoed. Sorry about that. Well, I think you did that yourself with the greasy comment.
Okay.
It actually sounded really good, though. Like the whole tea and the mind and the muscles. I was like, wow, this sounds really good.
Where do I buy?
Yeah, where do I buy?
Sign up now.
I especially don't want to be greasy.
That was great. That was really great. Just really smooth.
And for you watching on Patreon, that's how that really went down.
Yeah.
Where the hell were we? Thanks, Ollie. Okay.